Hello. Someone asked me to do this video about the Holy Roman Empire. And he said I talked about it sometimes when I did beer reviews. He didn't know much about it. Well, the reason I bring up the Holy Roman Empire when I do the beer reviews is that many beer brands and beer brewing companies were founded during the time of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, he said he didn't know what that was. While I do this little talk, and try not to make it too long, we're going to look at Pike Double IPA India Pale Ale. I thought I bought this at Rouse's, and then I realized that I had it already. So this will be a revisit. 8% alcohol, 80 international bitterness units. Now, it's from Seattle, Washington. We have the Pike Fish Market. Friend of mine said you shouldn't drink the beer while you do these talks because you look like Foster Brooks after about 10 minutes. Okay, well, beer is a social lubricant, so this will help me to be more social. Okay. I don't know how fresh this is. Rouse's and a lot of stores in New Orleans are notorious for leaving things on the shelf for a long time, so the hops might have faded. Yeah, it smells a little aged. Very caramel. Some fruit. A little bit of hop resin in the background. It's okay though. It's got a malt backbone, some sweetness, and the hops are still there, and the undertaste at least. Well, the Roman Empire, which started in Italy, the Italian peninsula in the city of Rome, slowly spread to encompass most of Europe, from the border of Scotland and England down to Spain and Morocco, east to what we would call Iraq, Turkey, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Jordan, Egypt, across North Africa, into western parts of Germany, southern Germany, Austria, Romania. When the Roman Empire started, it was a small republic in Italy. This was hundreds of years before Christ. And eventually Rome sort of abandoned their republic. They kept the structure of a republic. Rome was always officially a republic. But it really became a dictatorship or an oligarchy controlled by different factions, family factions, or gangs, we might call them, similar to organized crime. So you had different gangs, family cliques that ran it, and they got into this like copying the Greek city-states where they wanted to have an empire, and they started to spread around the Mediterranean. And you can see on this map that became very big. And they were renowned for their infantry, their military prowess. They also sort of invented the Marines, infantry troops that fight on ships. They came up with a gangplank where they would lower this plank down on an enemy ship and start raiding the ship, invading the ship. And anyway, the Romans were very powerful militarily and financially, everything. I mean, this became the world power, the Western world power. But it did deteriorate because they started these wealthy factions, these gang families. They wanted to get all the people behind them, so they theoretically had democracy. And what they would do is they would have all these welfare programs for the common man, similar to today in America and other countries. They call it the dole. They would dole out this money that was paid for in taxes. The Roman Empire became heavily burdened with taxes over the years. So you had these big mobs of people that didn't have a whole lot to do all day, and they had a real problem with that. Crime, high crime. But Rome did build a pretty widespread road network and everything. All right, so they had this huge empire, but it was very hard to protect because they were always being attacked on all the different borders. So they had problems with Germanic tribes attacking them from the north and the east. The Persian, Parthian Empire of Persia attacking them from the east. So they spent a whole lot of money on military considerations. We would call it today defense spending, even though a lot of it, well, at first it was for offense and then it was for defense to defend what they had taken over. They had all kind of internal problems, different factions fighting to take control. And you got to remember, the Roman Empire didn't have a king. It was not monarchy office. So what they did was they call it the commander-in-chief, or the imperator. We say the emperor. Caesar, Julius Caesar, the first, well, he was like the first, well, let's say, he wasn't officially an emperor. Augustus Caesar was the imperator, the commander-in-chief. And then you just had this whole series usually of little gangs fighting to put their guy in place. Many times the emperor was just a figurehead, the spokesman or the mouthpiece for the gang. But you had all kind of internal problems. Now, eventually in 395, AD 395, they split the empire into two pieces, the Western Roman Empire and the Eastern, because it was too difficult to rule from one capital. So you had the Eastern capital, Byzantium, an old Greek city, which later was renamed Constantinople after the great Eastern Emperor Constantine, and then Rome. Rome had kind of deteriorated by that time. The Eastern Empire was more vibrant, and so they continued on for hundreds of years. The Western Empire had all kind of problems with internal issues, and especially being attacked by different tribes. So 476 is the last official year of a Roman emperor of the West. It had been dying out before that, but technically it lasted till 476, AD 476. And then Europe, in Western Europe, they broke down into different tribal territories, which became countries. Now, the Eastern Empire continued on, and it was very powerful. 1071, they lost a very key battle to the Turks, and they kind of stumbled along after that, and they continued on officially till 1453. Only a few years before Columbus discovered America, the last Eastern Emperor, Constantine XI, was killed. All right, in a battle with the Turks, and the Turks set up their own Turkish empire, the Ottoman Empire, which lasted until 1918, not even 100 years ago. All right, we're going to focus on the West because that's where the Holy Roman Empire comes from. Christianity, which at that time was Roman Catholicism, became the official religion of the empire after Constantine the Great established that. After the Western Empire collapsed, you had different tribes trying to take over. In England, you had various tribes: Angles, Saxons, Jutes, England from them, okay? The big tribe that invaded what we call France today was the Franks. The Franks became very powerful, and they set up tribal leaders, or eventually they became kings. The Pope continued to rule in Rome under the under the thumb of different tribal rulers. Now, the Franks became very powerful, and they set up what we would call France today. The Pope got into trouble in the 700s with a tribe called the Lombards, which is a part of Italy today, Lombardy, in northern Italy, central and northern Italy. Now, Pepin the Great, leader of the Franks, went down there with his troops, and he rescued the Pope, and the Pope was appreciative, and they became fast friends or allies. And Pepin the Great in the 700s now, AD 700s, I believe it was 768, I could be wrong, or was it 786? I get confused, I have to look it up, but it doesn't really matter. He told the Pope that he could be the ruler of central Italy, these different little principalities, and that became known as the Papal States. The only papal state remaining today is the minuscule micro-state of the Vatican City, which is so tiny it's a neighborhood inside of the city limits of Rome. But the whole central part of Italy used to be the Papal States until it was seized by the Kingdom of Italy in the 1860s and 70s. All right. There was always this desire that they could recreate the Roman Empire in the West, to unify Western Europe, which was divided up into tribal, today we would call it countries or nations. Pepin's son Charles, or in German Karl, or in Latin Carol, became very powerful, and he ended up taking over all of what we call France today, also the Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands, and most of what we call Germany today in northern Italy. He was a big ally of the Pope. And in the year 800, on Christmas Day in AD 800, the Pope, now supposedly in the city of we know it was in Aix-la-Chapelle or Aachen, Germany today, which is on the French-German border. The Pope supposedly just out of the blue put a crown on Charlemagne's head and said, "Hail, Charles the Great, Charlemagne," that's Charlemagne, Charles the Great, Emperor of the Romans. More than likely, like most things, it was prearranged, probably with a lot of negotiations. But Charlemagne said, "Oh, thank you, Pope." And then he was declared not only the chief of the Franks, but Emperor of the Romans. And so there we have the beginning of the Holy Roman Empire. And if you look at this map, you'll see the Holy Roman, these three colors, and others are about later. It was all of what we call France today, Germany, and northern Italy. And then you see the yellow strip, that's the Papal States, which stayed pretty much in that general configuration until 1860. Now, he was very powerful, and he wanted to kind of like bring back the Roman Empire, even though he was not a Roman. He was a Frank, a Germanic tribes leader, Germanic leader. So he brought in a lot of scholars to try to start education back in Europe and everything. Unfortunately, he died, like we all do, and his son took over, and his son was very weak, a weak ruler, and didn't know what to do. And then he died, and then the three grandsons of Charlemagne began to fight over who would be the next ruler. And instead of having a huge war, they decided in 843 in Verdun to sign a treaty and to divide the empire up into three parts. And there you see the three colors. And that's where we get basically Germany, Italy, and France today. Now the Middle Kingdom sort of kind of like got absorbed by the Eastern and the Western Kingdom. And in fact, France and Germany, and centuries later, were fighting always over that middle spot, because they were saying, no, it belongs to us, and the Germans say, no, it belongs to us. And so that was a point of contention, that middle area that had belonged to Luther, we call it today, Lothringen, that area, or Lorraine in French. And in fact, they continued to fight over that land until 1945, when France seized it from Germany in the last switchover. Now, so the empire kind of broke up, and it was kind of like defunct after 843. They had some guys claiming to be the emperor, and some people said they were, but they really weren't. Now, this strong German leader named Otto came to power, and what he did was, and he took over what we call Germany today, Central Germany, and he was officially recognized in 962, AD 962, as the Holy Roman Emperor, because he was very strong, Otto the Great. And everybody recognized him as the emperor. And from 962 up until 1806, there was an emperor on the throne continuously. Now, this is a map that shows the general location of the Heiliges Römisches Reich, the Holy Roman Empire. You can see it's Central Europe, basically Germany, northern Italy, and the Czech Republic, what we would call the Czech Republic today, Bohemia and Moravia. So, you know, you had Brandenburg, which is around Berlin today. That was where Prussia started. Bohemia, where Prague, the capital of Czechia, is today. Moravia, eastern part of Czechia. So those are, in the central part, those are Slavs, not Germans, but this empire was really whoever was in it. You had Italians in northern Italy, and some Frenchmen in the western part of the empire, and Dutchmen in the northwestern part. So it was a very strong empire. Now, it was one of the key countries, I guess you could call it, an empire of countries in the Middle Ages. It was an empire because it had an emperor, and it was made up of different countries. Now, the Holy Roman Empire did have some problems because it didn't have a unified language. They generally were Germanic, but you had Dutch, French, Italian, and so on and so on. Oh, and I didn't mention Switzerland. That was also one of the areas of the empire. Another issue with the empire was it was not a kingdom that you could inherit like the Kingdom of France or England. You had to be elected emperor. That was always the case. So they would be squabbling over who would be the next emperor. And they got that idea from the old Roman Empire. So they're trying to mimic the original Roman Empire. It was never as big as the original empire, but it was fairly powerful. Now, at times. But 962, okay, so 1062, 1162, 1262, 1362, 1462, 1562. So we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years. This was one of the big areas of Europe. Everyone knew the Holy Roman Empire. Or they would just call it the Emperor of the Romans, Empire of the Romans, or generally people would just call it the Empire, because everybody knew what the empire was. So when you said, I'm going to the empire, they knew what this was, this huge thing full of different states. When they said they're going to the Eastern Empire, everyone knew that meant the Eastern Roman Empire, or as historians call it today, the Byzantine Empire, when no one back then called it the Byzantine Empire. That's a made-up name in the 1800s to refer to it. Later, or they might call it the Greek Empire, because the major language of the Eastern Roman Empire at the time was Greek. They might say the Empire of the Greeks. Okay, so you had the Holy Roman Empire was pretty powerful. They had a lot of internal problems because the Pope was always trying to claim he was the ultimate authority of the empire because he had crowned the first emperor. The emperor claiming he could control the Pope. So you had a faction that supported the emperor having total control, a faction supporting the Pope to have total control. So they spent a lot of time fighting over that, and that sort of weakened the empire. They spent so much time. Then you had a problem where the emperors were trying to control Italy, and France trying to control northern Italy. So a lot of fighting. France tended to be their natural enemy because they're fighting over Italy, northern Italy, which was broken up into little bitty tiny states. Now, but the real breakdown of the empire started with Martin Luther, who was a renegade priest. He's an interesting guy to study, but Martin Luther in 1517 openly revolted against the Catholic Church. He had support of one of the princes of the empire, the Duke of Saxony. Saxony was a state in central Germany. Other German states in the north resented the power of the Holy Roman Emperor, and they kind of they resented the Pope and the high taxes to the church and the empire. So Martin Luther was a convenient guy to help kind of lead a revolt against that. And it did lead to a war between the Protestants, who adopted Martin Luther's ideas at varying levels, against the Catholics, who remained loyal to the church in the south. So Germany was split between Protestants in the north and Catholics in the south. And it's still split like that today, although most people in Europe today don't really go to, or are not practicing Christians. I mean, theoretically, they might say they're Catholic or Protestant, but 90% don't even go to church except maybe for a wedding or a baptism. But this caused terrible animosity in Germany. It led to many wars within the empire between Protestant states led by various Protestant leaders and the German Catholic states led by the emperor and his allies. In 1560, around 1559, they signed a treaty in Augsburg, the Peace of Augsburg, and they decided to say, okay, we want to keep the empire together. This is a map of what it looked like in 1560. You see France in the west, the Kingdom of England, ruling England, Wales, and Ireland, their early colony, the Papal States in the middle. And they decided, here's the deal. If you're a Protestant ruler, you can make everybody in your state be Protestant. And if you're a Catholic ruler, everybody in your state can be forced to be Catholic. You can force them to be Catholic. So Protestants all moved to the north and the Catholics in the south. There was another big war that broke out in 1618 when you had a breakdown in that treaty because of the rise of Calvinism, which wasn't covered under the treaty. It wasn't Lutheranism or Catholicism. Now, the most famous Holy Roman Emperor really was Charles V. He was the fifth Charles of the empire. Charlemagne would be Charles I. Now, he was from the Habsburg family. Now, the Habsburgs were from Austria, and their capital is Vienna. The Habsburgs they were the Dukes of Austria, and they slowly got powerful. And in the 1400s, the Habsburg family became so powerful that they were able to engineer it to where they would always be elected Holy Roman emperors, okay? So from the 1400s up until when they were kicked out of power in 1918, the Habsburgs became the Holy Roman emperors. They basically ran the show through getting elected. They would always make sure that the emperor's son would be elected, or the grandson, whatever. I'm sure they gave very nice gifts to the electors, because what they did was they made a system where the big states of the empire, those big states got, see, if you were a tiny little state, and they had states that were as small as like a county in America, maybe 5 miles by 10 miles. But if you were one of the big states, Bavaria, one of the big states, Saxony, Brandenburg, in those areas, Austria, you got to be an elector. So it was very important to be an elector, because you got to vote for emperor, who got to be the next emperor. So you had a big voice in how the empire was run. There was no official capital of the Holy Roman Empire, but they would have they did have a parliament. They call it a diet. We call it a parliament. And they would meet in various areas around the empire, but there was no official capital. The unofficial capital was Vienna, because that was the capital of Austria, and Austria was the preeminent country of the Holy Roman Empire. Now, this confuses people, okay? The Habsburgs did inherit Austria. This was an area that belonged to them by blood, okay? So the Habsburgs were hereditary rulers of Austria. So they automatically, through inheritance, became rulers of Austria. The Holy Roman Empire, the emperor, that title, the emperor, was an elected job. So that was different. But in almost every case, the man who was the Duke of Austria was also, at the same time, the Holy Roman Emperor by election. Now, Charles V is interesting, because not only did he inherit the title in the early 1500s of Duke of Austria, by inheritance, he also inherited the title through marriage of King of Spain. So Charles V became Charles I, King of Spain, while at the same time he was Charles, Duke of Austria, and Charles V, the fifth Charles, ruler of the Holy Roman Empire. So he was the ruler of the Holy Roman Empire by election, and the Duke of Austria, and the King of Spain. So he ruled over a huge part of the world in the 1500s. Mexico, Florida. Well, okay, not Florida, because that was just being explored. Mexico, Cuba, we call it Hispaniola today, Dominican Republic. Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, Argentina, and all of this. All the Spanish territories, Northern Africa, Spanish, Morocco, which Spain still owns 2 parts of Morocco today. Most people don't realize that. Ceuta and Melilla are 2 territories in Africa still ruled by Spain today. You could win a bet on that. Now, so Charles V was this huge, powerful ruler. But he found that it was just, to use street language, a bitch to rule the whole thing. It was too big. It was too complicated to rule. So he decided that this was just not going to work. It was too big. yeah, the super empire, but it was too big. So he decided after a while, he was basically about to have a nervous breakdown. He said, it's too big. So what I'm going to do is he got some laws passed where his son became the king of Spain, Philip II, and he got his brother elected the new Holy Roman Empire emperor. And so that's where it split. Okay, so his brother became the Duke of Austria and the Holy Roman Emperor, and his son Philip II became the King of Spain. And then he abdicated both titles, all three titles, and he retired to a monastery where he died soon after. So that was when Spain and the Austrians split. But they continued to be allies. The Spanish Habsburgs were very strong allies of the Austrian Habsburgs and the Imperial Habsburgs. Okay, so you always had the Holy Roman Emperor and the Duke of Austria in an alliance with Spain, generally against France, because France was always trying to grab territory. But the real breakdown came in 1618 when the Protestants, and these are the Calvinists now, we call them Presbyterians today. They were very radical back then. Today they're not radical, but they were like ultra fundamentalists in the 1600s. And in the 1500s, like crazy people. You know, they went around France. They would, you know, people back then were very religious, and their attitude was, if you're not my religion, I hate you. So what they did in France was they would bust into Catholic churches and smash all the statues and say, these are idols. The Catholics worship idols. The Catholic Church never said they worshiped idols. Okay, if you go into a strongly devout Catholic country like France or Austria in the 1600s and you smash Catholic statues, the people aren't going to say, well, that's a shame that they did that. No, the Catholics are going to say, okay, we're going to come kill all of you. So in France, a terrible series of civil wars broke out between Catholics and Protestants, and I mean Calvinists. And it wasn't like they talk bad about each other like people do on the internet, you little bastard and all that. No, they went and they broke into towns and they would kill every Calvinist they found, or vice versa. They would break into a Catholic town and massacre every man, woman, and child Catholic. No joke. Well, this broke out in the empire, in the Kingdom of Bohemia, in Prague. Some Calvinists said, we are setting up a Calvinist church, Presbyterian church. Now, the Calvinists did take over Scotland. That's another story. The emperor said, no, I don't think so. So he sent some representatives to Prague to try to talk to them about they needed to give up Calvinism, which they considered a heresy, a philosophy of Satan. And so what the Czechs did to show their contempt for the emperor was they took the two representatives of the emperor and they threw the two guys out the window. Luckily, they weren't killed and they were able to make it back to Vienna. But when the emperor found out that his two representatives had been thrown out the window in an attempted murder, he just basically went off. In 1618, he said, you want a war, let's have it out. And he got together with the Pope and they basically called a crusade. They said, we are declaring war on all Protestants in the empire. And they also had help from Spain now. Spain were their allies. So the Spanish, and Spain was a very powerful country in the 15 and 1600s, okay, one of the world superpowers. So Spain sent troops in, and all the Austrian and the other Catholic Bavaria, for instance, sent troops in, and this was a huge war. They went in after the Protestants and they started to win. And the Catholic armies, these German Catholic and Spanish Catholic armies, began to progress through the empire north, killing all Protestants they could find or letting them convert to Catholicism. And it looked like the Catholic armies were going to conquer the entire empire, and the Holy Roman Emperor was going to be in full control again since before the days of Martin Luther. And this is where other European countries got scared, because they didn't mind Germany being a huge country that was kind of divided up and fighting with itself all the time, because then it was no threat to the rest of Europe. If all the German states were fighting each other, it was a big, on a map, yeah, it was big, but in reality, it was weak. So no problem. But Denmark got very, very scared, and Denmark used to be an empire at the time. They ruled Norway. Greenland, Iceland, and other northern territories. Denmark still rules Greenland today, by the way. They sent in troops to fight against the empire, and they were able to push them back and save Protestantism. Then the Catholic armies counterattacked, pushing out the Danes, and then Sweden jumped in, and now the war goes on again, and they push the Catholics back. So this war lasts literally 30 years, a 30-year war between German Protestant states, excuse me, and German. This beer is pretty good, but it's strong. So if you notice I have trouble pronouncing the letter S, that's the reason. But this went on 30 years. Now in the last, so that's the 3 stages of the war. Denmark jumping in, stage 1. Sweden jumping in, stage 2, to prevent a Catholic conquest. Now in the last stage, the Catholic armies were about to triumph again. The emperor was about to set up a truly unified German empire. Not just an empire in name, you know, that looks good on a map, but an actual empire where the emperor has real control. And you have a single German Holy Roman, and the reason they call it holy because it was Catholic, Roman because they were Roman Catholic and they were trying to mimic the old Roman Empire. Okay, and an empire because it was a bunch of nations under one ruler. That's what an empire is, many countries under one ruler. A true empire. And then France got not only scared, but greedy. See, France always had this idea that they should take over those eastern territories. The eastern areas were Burgundy and Franche-Comté, that means free county, Franche-Comté in eastern France today. And France also wanted to take over the Netherlands. France basically wanted to control everything from the English Channel to the Atlantic Ocean to the Pyrenees. Now the Pyrenees mountain separates France from Spain, that's a natural border. The Mediterranean Sea, so you have natural borders. But in the east, you didn't really have a natural border. They wanted the Rhine River and the Alps in the south, the Alps mountains. So France would be secure from invasion. So right at the end in the 1630s, right at the point where the emperor was about to conquer the entire empire, guess who jumps in to fight the imperial armies? The kings of France, the Bourbon Kingdom of France sends in troops to help the Protestants fight a fellow Catholic country. So what we have now is the war is no longer a religious war, and this was what we call the first political war, the last phase of the 30 Years' War in the 1630s, because France is sending troops in to fight against a fellow Catholic country, not for religion, but for political and territorial considerations. So by 1648, the Catholic rulers of Austria and the empire realize they can't win. They meet in Westphalia in Germany, and they signed a peace treaty saying, okay, fine, we're calling it off. We'll still have an emperor, but under the treaty, his powers were quite limited. The Protestant areas were allowed to continue to be Protestant. And the little city-states, and I mean some of them were almost like you would call neighborhood states, achieved a much higher level of independence. So yes, from 1648 to 1748, for about 150 years, the empire continued to exist. But it was handicapped because of the independence of the various states, and it became sort of like a confederation. Yes, you had an emperor. He was on the throne. On paper, he had vast powers. In reality, he had very limited powers. Here's a map of the empire after the Peace of Westphalia. Imagine this. Look at all the states. Now you have the gray in the southwest. That's Austria. Austria means Eastern Reich, Eastern Empire, or Eastern Empire country. You have Bavaria in the south, where my pinky is. Saxony, a powerful German kingdom. Brandenburg, later Brandenburg, Prussia, later just the Kingdom of Prussia in the northeast. And then all the other city-states and tiny states. some of these states were, you know, there were over 300 states. So imagine how divided up Germany was. And then you had the Spanish Netherlands. So Spain continued to rule vast parts of the empire. Franche-Comté, the Netherlands, Spanish Netherlands, Luxembourg. That was no problem because Spain was an ally of the empire. So not an issue. Of course, after the year 1700, the Bourbons took over Spain, and Spain became an ally of France against the Austrians and the Holy Roman Empire. Louis XIV was able to engineer it to where his grandson became the king of Spain. But then another problem broke out because the rest of Europe thought now they were worried about the empire becoming a superpower. Now they're worried about France becoming a superpower, because the problem was if the grandson, you see, the problem was the king of Spain, the Habsburg king of Spain, Charles, died and he had no children. If the king of Spain's grandson became the king of Spain, let me reverse myself. If the king of France's grandson became the king of Spain, once the king of France died, and his son was already dead, okay, his son had died young, the king of Spain would become the king of France. Okay, so France and Spain would become one country, like Scotland and Ireland, Scotland and England today. So the rest of Europe ganged up on France and would not allow the Bourbon king of Spain to become also the king of France. So they had this terrible war, and France lost. The Austrians and the empire jumped in on France. And they had to sign a treaty in 1713, whereas France, and in the treaty, France had to promise that France and Spain could never be a united kingdom. It would really today be the United Kingdom of France and Spain. And so Philip, Louis's grandson, remained king of Spain, and the Bourbons are on the throne today in Spain. Okay, John Charles of the House of Bourbon is the king of Spain today. But his great-grandson, Louis's great-grandson, Louis XV, became king of France. But France and Spain remain allies because of the Bourbon connection. Also, at the end of the 30 Years' War in 1648, France was able to take over various parts of the empire. And you'll see that France was able to expand into the empire. You see these little areas here inside the red line. We call that today Lorraine, Alsace and Lorraine. This bothered the Germans to no end, because they felt like France had taken advantage of their internal problems and seized land inside of their Holy Roman Empire of the German nation, inside of the German nation. So the attitude of the German people was that France had seized German territory by taking advantage of internal German problems. And so the Germans had since 1648, the Germans had always put France on their checklist of to get back at, you know, their to get back at checklist. Basically saying, you know, one day we're going to get that land back. France better watch it. Okay. The empire continued along. Now, a very interesting part of the Holy Roman Empire is that one of their dukes, one of their rulers, the ruler of Hanover, was a relation of the King of England, James II. James II was thrown out of England because he was trying to establish in 1689, he was trying to reestablish Catholic rule in England. And the Protestants said no way, and they threw him out. His daughter was married to a Dutch noble, and she was able to come to the throne. William and Mary Stuart were able to come to the throne in 1689. They had no children. They both died. Her sister, Anne, House of Stuart, became the Queen of England. She had a lot of children, but they never lived. They all died. She had, what was it, 13 children? They all died. 12 children, and they all died. So when Anne died in the early 1700s, they had to find the closest relative The closest relative to Anne of the House of Stuart in England was actually the Duke of Hanover, a city, not a city-state, but a small state in central Germany in the empire. He was an elector. He was a small time. An elector of the empire was invited to become the new king of England. He said, okay, no problem. So George I, ruler of Hanover, an elector of the empire, became king of England. And there is your connection between the kings of Great Britain and the empire today. So he was two rulers at once. Duke of Hanover, elector of the empire, king of Great Britain, because they changed the law and they made the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Scotland. In 1801, they changed it, and it was the United Kingdom of Great Britain, Scotland, and Ireland, today Northern Ireland, because the rest of Scotland broke off. In 1949, they broke all connections to the crown and became a republic. But anyway, let's go forward. The empire continued to exist at various levels of strength. Now, there was a woman who inherited the throne of Austria, Maria Theresa. A war broke out because she was not allowed to be Holy Roman Empress. There was a law. You could only be an emperor if you were a man. There was no ruling, there was no statutory allowance for a female empress. So people took advantage of that, and they tried to attack the empire. And they had a big war in the 1750s. And what they did was they said, well, okay, fine. Germany, the Austrians lost land to Prussia, Silesia. Silesia is an area ruled by Poland today, but Silesia was a very important area of the empire, full of minerals. Prussia was allowed to grab that area. They made a peace treaty. Her husband, Maria Theresa's husband, became the Holy Roman Emperor. She continued to be the ruler of Austria by blood. When she died, her son, Joseph, became Duke of Austria. He was elected Holy Roman Emperor. He also became the ruler of the Netherlands, because what happened was when Spain lost the war back in the early 1700s, Austria took over the Netherlands, which we call Belgium and Luxembourg today. So imagine this, in 1789, on the eve of the French Revolution, if you were the Duke of Austria, you not only were the Duke of Austria, you were also the King of the Republic. You were also the Holy Roman Emperor, and you were the ruler of the Netherlands and some other little isolated areas around central Germany. Well, the French Revolution broke out in 1789, and that changed the whole story, because what you had there was a group of deep, speculative conspirators. And their goal was not to take over France and set up a republic, really. That was part of the goal. The goal was to take over the world and set up a republic of the world where all religion would be banished, all kingdoms would be banished, and there would be a world brotherhood ruled by this exalted, enlightened, that's the word they used, ruling class of Freemasons who had inherited all the knowledge of the Babylonian Empire, the secret doctrine, we would call it today, Gnosticism. Now, what happened was when the illuminated people, the Illuminati, as people call it today, and that's considered a conspiracy theory, but actually that's what they call themselves. This brotherhood of secular mankind, they did succeed in murdering the King of France, Louis XVI of the House of Bourbon, his son Louis XVII, and his wife, Marie Antoinette, the daughter of Maria Theresa, Habsburg, in establishing the French Republic. Well, what happened was Austria, Prussia, England, Spain, the Italian states realized, look, we fight over land sometimes. Okay, fine. That's a typical thing countries do. But this French Revolution is a whole new ball game. These are people trying to take over the world and revolutionize the entire world. So they had to call off their little petty territorial conflicts, and they agreed to team up and wipe out the revolution. England, France, everybody, Russia included. So they went after France, and they started trying to invade France with the approval of the French king, Louis XVI, who was under the control of the revolutionaries. He cooperated with the revolutionaries, but only because he knew he would be murdered if he did not. And he was hoping that the allies who invaded France, the old traditional countries, could defeat the revolution. He could be rescued, and that he could have all the revolutionaries massacred and, you know, executed for treason against Christianity and the empire. I mean, the Kingdom of France. Well, unfortunately for the allies, the French revolutionaries had some pretty good military ability, and especially under Napoleon, who rose to prominence during the wars of the French Revolution. He was able to defeat not only the Austrians, but the Russians, the Prussians, the Italian states, the Spanish kingdom, and the Kingdom of Great Britain. So Napoleon got so powerful that he was able to make himself, let me restate it, he was able to get himself elected Emperor of France. He was able to get the Pope to crown him Emperor of France. You know, Napoleon was always trying to mimic Charlemagne and the old Roman emperors. France was so powerful under Napoleon that it was pretty obvious he was going to invade Germany and not only take over Germany in 1806, but he was going to make himself, or have himself, declared Holy Roman Emperor and have the Austrian Habsburgs kicked out of office. The Duke of Austria knew this, so what he did was he said, you know, screw that. Excuse my language, but that's pretty much what he was thinking. So before Napoleon was able to seize the crown, he was able to get a law passed that eliminated the Holy Roman Empire. So the Holy Roman Empire was officially declared non-existent, and then they created a new country called the Kingdom of Austria, which was Austria, Northern Italy, and Hungary. And that big southeastern European empire continued in power until 1918. And that was a hereditary empire. You did not have to be elected Emperor of Austria. So the Duke of Austria in 1806 became the Emperor of Austria. And the Holy Roman Empire was declared out of business because they didn't want Napoleon to seize the crown, and he couldn't seize the crown of a defunct empire. If it had not been for the French Revolution and Napoleon, who knows, the Holy Roman Empire might still exist today. The last great war that the empire fought was against revolutionary France from 1792 until they went out of business in 1806. Yes, they were divided. Yes, they were a weak confederation, but still in all, the Holy Roman Empire was able to give France a very good run for their money, and came within, literally within miles of victory. But Napoleon was defeated in 1815 because basically the whole world teamed up against him. After Napoleon was defeated, the Austrians got together with the rest of the European allies, and they said, well, we're not going to bring back the Holy Roman Empire because they just considered that it was played out, so to speak. And they made a new, a new structure. And the new structure was called the German Confederation. And the German Confederation used the old borders of the empire before Napoleon came around. And you can see the red line. That's the Holy Roman Empire, reconstituted as the, minus Italy. They had lost Italy long before. So this is the German Confederation 1815. Prussia in orange. You see the Kingdom of Bavaria down in the south. And Austria in green, ruling areas inside and outside the empire, just like Prussia inside and outside the empire. I'm sorry, Prussia in yellow, East Prussia and outside the empire. And so you had a new, it's not a country, it was a sort of like the United States of German countries, the German Confederation in 1815. Same thing as the Holy Roman Empire. They didn't have a capital. They would meet from time to time in different cities. The general idea was that eventually they would create a united German empire. In the 1830s, they established what was called the Zollverein, the customs union, free trade within the empire, and more states joined. So by 1865, you basically had free trade within the empire. You had united German states, and it looked like Germany was going to become a united country. But the problem here was that Austria and Prussia were at loggerheads. Prussia thought if Germany became united, it should be under their control, because Prussia had become a very powerful Protestant northern Germanic country. Austria continued to be a very strong Catholic southern German state. So the problem was that Austria wanted to control the empire. Prussia wanted to control the empire. And I mean, who ever heard of sharing power, right? So as you would expect, in 1866, Austria and Prussia went to war, and Austria lost. And they were expelled from the Confederation. Prussia took over control of the Confederation. And in 1871, all the German states, minus Austria, joined the new German Empire, official German Empire, or as the Germans called it, the Second Reich. And what does Reich mean? Reich means empire country. Under the control of the Hohenzollern dynasty of Prussia, the capital of the new German Empire is Berlin. And the Habsburgs in Vienna, Austria, the ancient imperial capital, lose control of the German Empire, and they are on the outs. So they concentrated on ruling their own personal territories, okay? Now, Europe became very frightened because now Germany is truly unified under the Prussians. Saxony, Westphalia, Bavaria, etc. are united under the control of the Prussians, the Kingdom of Prussia. So the King of Prussia is now the German Emperor. William I, Frederick, William II. Generally, the European countries ignored Germany because they spent most of their time fighting with each other. But now when Germany becomes a unified country and a very powerful country minus Austria, the rest of Europe, and specifically England, begins to line up against Germany. England always taking the side of whatever country was fighting against a strong country, who they would perceive as a threat. Now, all through the 1800s, Great Britain would fight against Russia, who they considered a world threat. But when Germany got unified, Great Britain said, let's put Russia on the back burner and let's concentrate on Germany, because they perceived Germany as a greater threat to their power. So we know what happened. Great Britain declared war on Germany in 1914 to try to bring them down. Germany resurrected sort of like a phoenix in the 1930s, and then Great Britain declared war on them again in 1939 to bring them down, after Germany had reunited with Austria in 1939. I'm sorry, 38. And they were not able to defeat Germany, but they were able to drag the United States and Russia into the war. Not so much Russia, but the United States, and they were able to bring down the Third Reich, the third German Empire country. Germany, who had reconquered the French territories, Alsace and Lorraine, or as the Germans saw it, the French territories that were stolen from Germany, they were forced to turn those back over to France in 1945, Alsace-Lorraine. So that's the that's a quick history, and a very quick and not detailed history of the Holy Roman Empire of the German nation. You could spend literally decades studying that empire, because we're talking about an empire that was initially established in the year 800 and continued in one form or another until the year 1806, over 1,000 years. It's fascinating. It makes you wonder, what if Germany had truly been united in the year 962? Maybe they would be the preeminent world power today instead of the United States. But then, of course, what benefit would that be to Germany? Because then they might find themselves in a world of trouble. Germany did try to become an imperialist power after 1871, and they certainly did find themselves in a world of trouble. So, what lessons can we learn from the Holy Roman Empire? Well, one lesson is that if you try to get strong and you're surrounded by powerful countries, they're going to gang up on you. Secondly, if you ever do unify and become a single united country, like in 1871, the German Empire, the Second Reich, countries are going to gang up on you. And if you try to take over in parts of the world and make a huge world empire, you better try to avoid a war, because if you get into a war like the Second Reich did in 1914, countries are going to gang up on you and you're probably going to lose. And when you try to make a counterattack like the Third Reich, the Third German Empire, did under National Socialism and Hitler in 1939, countries are going to gang up on you and you're probably going to lose again. So I'd be interested to see what you think about that. It's fascinating to me. I'd like to visit Germany one day. So thank you for watching this video production.